Over the course of this visit, Mr. Trump will go on to meet some of the biggest names in Chinese politics and business. But the past few hours were all about ceremony and symbolism. For while Donald Trump may have been given the red carpet treatment, he was never left to forget exactly who was rolling it out. Our Jeff Zelany is traveling with the president across Asia and joins us now from Beijing. And Jeff, this is arguably the most important stop on this Asia tour for President Trump. And it comes just after that very significant speech in Seoul, where the president again urged China to rein in North Korea.
No question. This is the most important stop, largely because China, of course, is an economic superpower, and there is this ongoing sort of issue with how President Xi Jinping and President Donald Trump will get along and work together on economic issues. Of course, North Korea front and center on the agenda here. We saw the speech in Seoul, South Korea, where the president called on world leaders, particularly China and Russia, to squeeze economically the North Korean regime here. But it is the power struggle, if you will, between President Xi Jinping and President Trump that really is front and center here. Arguably, President Xi is at his strongest position yet after consolidating power in a historic fashion. President Trump, of course, is arriving to these meetings in a weakened fashion. He's under investigation back home, and of course, everyone realizes that. So these bilateral meetings that take place on Thursday at the Great Hall of the People here in Beijing, certainly the most important meetings this President Trump has had to date.
Jeff, President Trump has the option of putting North Korea back on the designated terror watch list. He didn't do it last night in the speech. Is he likely to do it going forward?
Well, the White House official says the president will make that determination by the end of this trip, so has about a week or so to do it. Now, of course, you'll remember that President George W. Bush, at the end of his term in October of 2008, took North Korea off of the watch list as part of a negotiation over trying to rein in the nuclear program. That didn't happen, but President Trump has left open the possibility of putting it back on the list. But the reality here is that there's a lot of symbolism in a move like that, but certainly already sanctions are much stronger than they were at the time. So he will make that decision, but did not announce it at all or talk about it at all in his speech in Seoul.
All right, Jeff Zelany for us following the president's tour. Thank you very much. Well, Donald Trump arrived in China after leaving South Korea, and there in virtual earshot of Pyongyang, he called the North Korea, quote, a hell that no person deserves. Will Ripley is the only U.S. reporter in Pyongyang and has more on how the president's visit went down.
President Trump's speech here in South Korea really touching a nerve on a very sensitive issue for this country's government, human rights. They have long expressed outrage against the United Nations for these numerous allegations of widespread human rights abuses in this country. People who voice any sort of dissent being imprisoned by secret police, sent off to gulags where they endure subhuman conditions, the kind of conditions that President Trump spoke about at the National Assembly in Seoul. North Korea firing back, saying, in fact, it's the United States that's the human rights violator, a laughable argument for many people around the world, but that's the narrative that North Korea tells its citizens, that the United States is dangerous, chaotic, and that here it's a safe, collective society where people can live without fear of violence. I'll read you a portion of a news article that was released before President Trump's speech, released here in Pyongyang, saying, quote, the U.S. should not impudently style itself as a human rights judge, but mind its own poor human rights records in its land where racial discrimination, gun-related crimes, and all other social crimes prevail. And I can tell you that's exactly the argument that's been thrown back at me many times when I have questioned North Korean officials about allegations of human rights abuse. The North Koreans also speaking to us before and after President Trump's speech, trying to downplay the significance and the impact of his words, telling us, quote, we don't care about what that mad dog may utter because we've already heard enough. They talked about the fact that there are dozens of U.S. warships, including 3 aircraft carriers, assembled in the waters off the Korean Peninsula, about to engage in yet another round of joint military exercises. And they say that completely justifies their own military demonstrations, the time and place of which we still don't know. Will Ripley, CNN, Pyongyang, North Korea.